Okay, there he is.
There he is. What a nice guy.
Well, first off, thank you for agreeing to speak with me.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for offering.
I mean, how could I not? You have like probably one of the best resources on the internet regarding the effects of testosterone on women. So
Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot.
I use your Tumblr extensively for research. So
Ah, touched and flattered.
hey, I'm just saying the truth. Well, first off, I wanted to ask, I know that you used to identify as non-binary and even took testosterone for a few months. So what did your journey look like as you approached a radical feminist stance?
Yeah, so let me think. Where do I start? I was like, I guess I started college and I like the first day of college I changed my name and pronouns. And it was like sort of a good place to do that because I wasn't around anybody that I knew. Um and so I could really remake myself, and it's sort of like it was a really hard time, but it was also a really good time because I hadn't really let myself be butch before I like let myself not be a woman, if that makes any sense. So I was like sort of dressing in a way that I liked and moving in a way that I liked, but at the same time, the more I did that, the more I like I felt like, "Oh, I feel really good. How can I feel even gooder?" And I fell in with, of course, like, all of the trans people, women, young women on campus. By the end of the first semester, they were all starting to go on testosterone, and I got a binder for my birthday in October, and that was sort of the gateway. I was like, I gotta, like, chase the dragon, and it sorta seemed like the only thing I could do. There weren't any butch women, um, and I wanted to be accepted. I'd never had very many friends, um, and I felt, like, totally failed as a girl, so I just went right into this, and because I was, like I mean, like, I was a little skinny butch, and everybody that looked at me was like, "You're the most non-binary person I've ever seen in my life," and I'd never been affirmed for how I looked before, because, of course, like, even if your parents are okay with you, even if my parents were okay with me looking the way I do and liking women, it sort of felt like nobody wanted me to look like this. Maybe they'd accept that, but nobody, looks at their little girl and thinks like, "Oh, I can't wait for her to turn into a butch dyke." Um, and so this really felt like the sort of the answer. Um, I did I went through Planned Parenthood in a couple months, the second semester of my freshman year, and I got testosterone within a half hour. Um, and I was excited, I was really nervous, because I knew that changes would happen really quickly, and, I realized that, like, yeah, I was sorta happy with the changes, I was getting stronger, and, but I could also feel my body wasn't working. I was getting hot flashes a lot, like, really terrible hot flashes because I was going through menopause, and, what else? I the main thing was my mood, like, all of my creativity was gone. Like, I didn't care for any of the things that I cared about before, and, like, I literally was a different person when I was taking that drug, because it altered my personality so much, and, yeah, I stopped. I stopped after 3 months, and it took about a year to get back to normal mentally. Physically took a little longer. Um And then in between freshman year and the second semester of my junior year, I was identifying as non-binary. For that 3 months, I had tried to go full, like, FTM, um, but I sort of stepped back a little bit, and it wasn't like I wasn't non-binary, but I sort of, like I had to step back. Like, I felt a little shamed. I felt like, um, I needed to be in that middle space and also not think about it too much. But then the pandemic happened. I wasn't really doing anything. I, like, so didn't care about my identity. Um, or, like, I found it really cumbersome because, like, I went to, like, the Verizon store to get a new phone, and this guy used she, her pronouns for me to talk about getting this new phone, and my mom was like, "They use they, them pronouns," and I was like, "I just wanna get this phone, man." Like, I just wanna get this phone, like, just don't worry about it. Um, but the real change, like, my introduction to radical feminism was in the first semester of my junior year, and it was a women's rights class. It was called Women's Rights, Human Rights, and that's actually it's my most popular Tumblr post. Like, no matter what I post, this one always comes back,
I
and
just read that one actually.
yeah, I mean, it's a keeper. It's, I mean, the more I read it, the more I realize, like, how lucky I was to have that professor. He was the only teacher of women's rights in the college, and he brought real feminist texts over. Like, so we were reading The Creation of Patriarchy by Gerda Lerner. I think that was one of the first books that we read, and it just blew my mind because um it sort of it um it proposed this history of women that wasn't merely of oppression. It, like, proposed a very concrete and ordered history of why women made certain compromises, that eventually led to, their complete oppression under patriarchy. Um, and I was like, "Why hadn't I heard this before?" Um, we read the Scum Manifesto, and I was like, "Oh my gosh." Like, I was kinda like, she's my hero, Valerie. I mean, not my hero, but I really admired her anger, you know? Like, I admired her rage and her not holding back. Um, and I was non-binary at the time, and I thought, like, the more we started reading about human trafficking and, like, the struggles that objectively my sex class had gone through, it became more and more irritating to refer to myself as, not a woman, and to refer to the women we were reading about as "they" rather than "we." Um, and the more I read stuff, like, I started getting into Mary Daly's Gynecology, which is still, like, my top favorite, like, book of all time. I'm not actually done with it. I have a few pages to go. But, um, the way that she brings in language and is talking about, what is she talking about? Um, it's hard to, summarize it, but she takes women through this, like, journey of, like, she goes through, like, all of the travesties that have, been committed to women. So she talks about specifically in the second part of her three-part book, um, like, she talks about American gynecology and how, Nazis, used American gynecology to perform, like, absolute horrors upon women during the Holocaust, and then there's FGM in Africa and, all of that stuff, and then she's using that to show how we can, not she's using it to, um, then explain how women can come together again and use mythology and our own bodies, to, um, come together and create class consciousness, and it was like she was speaking directly in my ear, like, I felt like I was hearing something really powerful. Um, and that was kind of it was really scary. It was like a, it was like I was waking up from a dream, but it was kind of a nightmare, and I was waking up underground. So even though I was non-binary at the end of the semester, at the second semester, I really started getting onto Tumblr and looking up the no tags and being like, "Oh my god, like, these women are so incredible." And I never that's not what I was told. It was even harder because I was rooming with 3 non-binary AFAB girls, women at the time, and I was really afraid how they were gonna react. It turns out that they were kind of okay with it, and that you're really supposed to validate every single person. When you're trans, you have to validate really terrible things. You're supposed to validate, like, violent kinks and, situations that really might be harmful. But that sort of goes both ways in that were they didn't want to, um, outright, um, shun me because that would be unvalidating. Um, but at the same time, I knew that I couldn't talk about what I was learning about women. I couldn't say the word women too much. And I think the first semester of my senior year, one of my roommates actually stopped talking to me for 2 months, even though, yeah, just because of some stuff that I'd brought up about some books that I'd read, um, about and it I became so disgusted in, like, just about everybody that I'd interacted with before, because they just I felt like I was learning so much and that they had no intellectual curiosity, that all they had was this defense mechanism. It really exposed them to me as well, like, as cowards and as not free thinkers, and it made me realize that all this time I thought I had been an independent thinker, all through my teens, I had not been. I was just, following a trend or following, what was really comfortable to me, and I entered the school being totally in line with the demographics of the school, and I left it a complete pariah, um, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
That's that's quite a journey, but I gotta say it's one that I've heard before. I feel like a lot of particularly butch women tend to follow that pipeline of being gender non-conforming, not fitting in, and then therefore going, well, I must not be a woman, and it's easier to just identify as non-binary, and therefore you kind of feel the restrictions of, what we, I guess, are used to womanhood being lift off of you.
Yeah. And, like, I don't know if I could have been, like, butch and, like, as comfortable as I am now without having that sort of intermediate period of being non-binary, just because in the time that we're in, there are simply no butch role models. There's absolutely nobody on television, who looks like and acts like the way that I want to act, and I mean, I lived in a very liberal community, but my family didn't weren't friends with any gay people, even though they were technically tolerant. Um, but yeah, and that's also the reason that I don't blame myself for going down that path because like there was there was literally nothing I could have done. I was a child and I just consider myself lucky that I didn't go farther than I did.
One thing that I have noticed is that I mean, I think a lot of us really did start out on that lib fem side. I mean, I grew up, when I was in high school, I was in like our school's gay straight alliance. And this is before that, they renamed
Yeah.
everything to be more inclusive. But I remember identified as gender fluid for like a good year because it was like I like wearing button down shirts sometimes, but also
Oh,
dresses
yeah, the bow
sometimes.
ties and the yeah. Um,
I'm so glad there aren't a lot of pictures of that time because I dressed horribly.
yeah.
But I just know that I feel like for one thing, being gay is inherently isolating in a way.
Mhm.
Because when I look back on that time, a lot of the kids who were in the GSA weren't actually gay. They were just what we call, like, you know how there's a lot of people who identify as queer today, and they use queer to
Mhm.
just mean weird. They use it like the original meaning was weird or strange. And a lot of kids who just felt weird or strange or didn't conform perfectly would lump themselves in with gay people. And that
Yeah, like, they just dyed their hair or they read a lot of fan fiction and stuff. Um, and that's okay, but it almost annoys me that being gay has become it does annoy me that being gay has come to mean cool because now you really, really can't quite tell who's gay anymore. Um, or, like, you just really don't know who to trust when you're actually talking about being gay.
for sure. And I mean, I just remember so many girls who identified as bisexual or pansexual or even as lesbian, but like the minute it was, hey, I'm gay, do you want to go on a date? It was always that faint look of disgust that you were actually like suggesting homosexual activity, that you were actually
Yeah,
saying, hey, I'm
exactly.
attracted to women.
Like, bisexuality is not an accessory. Please, like, please be real about it. Although, have you seen that not although, have you seen that study, it's basically saying that, the number of people in our generation, in Gen Z, who has, or my generation, who identifies as queer has skyrocketed, especially girls that identify as bisexual. But then if you look at the amount of girls who identify as bisexual who have had experiences with the same sex, it's like maybe 10-20%. Um,
I
which
do
is,
remember seeing that one, which is just
yeah.
it's really astounding because if you try to put definitions to words, people tend to have an issue with you saying, okay, bisexuality is the attraction to both the male and female sex. It's sexual attraction, it is an attraction to those two things. Or being a lesbian is sexual attraction to other females. It is, you know, it is this defined thing. People tend to have this issue with having strict definitions because it's inherently exclusionary to have a definition.
Mhm. It's I know, like, that's what a word is. Like, it's not exclusive to call a bush because it's not a tree. Um, like, you can't call a bush a tree because it is a bush, and that's what makes a bush and a tree a tree. Um, but yeah, and I think that there's really, like there's an element of practice to it too. Like, I does that make sense? Like, um, a lot of girls say that they're bisexual, but then the practice is heterosexual. And I
Yes.
also wonder how many, I think that young girls today are like everybody is sold women as objects. And that includes young girls. Young girls also see themselves as objects and see other girls as objects. And I think that they can confuse that for sexual attraction because, like, that's all that they're made to be. Um, of course, they're going to be, think that they're attracted to something that's marketed as something, something to desire, like through the male gaze. Um,
I
there's no
definitely
other.
agree. I mean, if you look at how I mean, it's been common that sex sells. People have been using women to sell products for the longest. But I think it's
Mhm.
spread to the extent to where we spent 2 years practically living online only, you know?
Yeah.
And whereas previously you might have interacted with more people, might have had real grounded interactions, when you only see women online as consumables who are, and with a newer practice of like OnlyFans and selling nudes and all this stuff that's become way more common and outspoken, it's definitely like womanhood is something that is commodified.
Yeah, it's like it's a product first and foremost. Um,
And in
It's
general,
it's
I
the
think
best.
that kind of reflects how like sexuality, like I guess how sex is being presented now versus like I guess if you look at older films or older media, like maybe it's just me being gay, but you know in Alien when Ripley
Mhm.
is she's wearing like a tank top. Like, "Oh my God, an
No, I've
attractive
never
woman."
seen any. But
I know.
yeah, like, yeah.
And you compare that to like, I don't know, Zoe Kravitz in the newest Batman movie, which I haven't seen, but I have seen the pictures and I just it looks so plastic and so fake and
Yeah,
so
they're just, like they're all so shiny and sparkly. They always got the false eyelashes, like, what are you, like you said it was, like, the Batwoman? Or
yeah, she
it's
thinks she was Batwoman in that movie, but
she thinks. I mean, I don't know, like, if you're Batwoman, do you have time to shave your legs? Like, I just it doesn't even feel like the women on TV are women anymore, and I some or not anymore, but it feels like, of course, these things are all written by men, and it feels like, especially actresses, are just sort of the puppets, and it's all men pulling the strings and speaking out of these flapping mouths. But it feels really, um, uncanny to me. It feels like the entirety of women on TV is just, like, uncanny valley.
it's very sterile. It's like even on like TikTok, the people there are too pretty. Like it's the filters, but it's not just the filters. Everyone is dressed like way too well. The rooms are so put together, they don't look lived in. Everything just seems performative, and especially in how, even on like a daily basis, how women dress. I mean, it's the middle of summer and it's hot as hell outside, and I'll still see women with like a full face of makeup, the heels, wearing this full outfit that's like the sheer amount of effort that goes into making this look. It just feels too performative. It doesn't feel like a lived-in experience.
Yeah, it's not conducive to living. Like, you can't walk around in heels all day. Like, you can't, like I don't know, like, you can't jump in a lake when you have, like, that kind of dress or heels on. And the more that I've been comfortable living in my skin, I've become actually, like, pretty phobic towards even, like, buying new things or wearing jewelry because I'm so dedicated to just, like, living in myself and, like, reminding myself every day that the body I have is beautiful because it's the body I have, and it's the body that I'm living in and working in. Um, and, like, the less I care about my body, the more comfortable the shoes I wear, like, the more beautiful I feel. And I think I wish that more girls had the opportunity to see that, especially, like, I don't know, like, I've been thinking a lot about, just the environments that girls or everybody these days is living in, which is, like for me, I was born in a suburb, and to be honest, there weren't a lot of opportunities to go outside and, like, get, like to, like, understand that my body is made for living because it was all about going from one air-conditioned room to the next, and I think a lot of girls don't have the imagination to think of something more for themselves than being in a room that is pretty. Um, does that make sense?
It does, and I do think that to an extent, a lot of just postmodernist thought in general posits that you are somehow separate from your body. In a way,
Mhm.
it's suggesting that you have a soul, which is where the gender lies or something. And so your body has to match your soul, but in order to do that, you have to buy things. There are commodities you need to get to perform the correct thing to align with your soul. It's not like your body is just who you are. It's not a way to experience the world. It's just the thing you are wearing. And I feel like that's a very disordered way to think of your own body.
Exactly. And I also think that it displaces or estranges us from, like, the importance of the world itself, of, like, literally feeling like, literally touching grass, literally feeling trees, because if all that matters is in your head and all that matters is identity, which you might be, like, you know, gathering things to adorn yourself with, prance about in, you forget that life is your body interacting with the world. You forget about the beauty of the world. It becomes all about, words and performance, and becomes completely outside of living in your body with the world. It becomes a dissociated state to live in. And that dissociated state is really like the prime, like, mental state to be groomed and to, like, completely have your personality change, because you don't know what yourself is, and you don't know what the world is enough to come back to it.
I do think that even like the sense of self, like what you consider to be your identity, has been, especially through the internet, just been turned into this thing that you have to actively work to achieve versus like, 'cause like I'm a person who reads, but if you go on like TikTok, there's people who I'm a reader, so I have to read these books, so I have to have this kind of bookshelf, so I have to dress dark academia, so I have to perform that I'm a person who reads
Oh my
instead of
gosh,
just,
yes. And,
yeah.
like, all of that stuff, like, all of the thinking about, like, I've seen those booktubers, and, like, the thinking about how your bookshelf is gonna look and how you're going to look and come off as a reader. All that time takes away from actually reading. All of that time spent thinking about how you are a reader takes you away from the subjects that you're interested in. Um, it's really I think that, like, I've learned that, um, you do stuff and identity follows. It's, like, built throughout your life. Like, I know people in my college town, the guy who's a baker, like, his identity is that he's a baker. It isn't that he identifies as a baker, it's that he, like, wakes up at 3 a.m. and he bakes stuff until 12 p.m. Mm, and, but I don't yeah, maybe that's where I'll end with that.
I it's nice to know that we're basically on the same page here, but I really do. It's just this is something that very much annoys me because I see people my own age who have this issue, and then I'm 21. My brother is 14, and so I'm seeing him go through, being a teenager, and he spent the first couple years of that online only. When school started during the pandemic, he stayed online until he finished middle school. He hasn't been in real life, like with the real life classroom, for 3 years. And so now, when he wants to go, he's crafting this. Like he wants to dress like like those characters from Peaky Blinders with like the hats. He wants to dress like that. And
Yeah.
he's crafting his whole little identity off of the clothing he wears. And instead of just picking out, I like this hat, I'll wear this hat, it's I have to specifically craft this identity off of other media even. It's not even from his individual likes and tastes, because that's one thing. Like when I was in middle school, I had like a collection of like little polymer clay food earrings. I had like
Mhm.
50 of those fuckers, and they were like the heaviest earrings. They all look stupid, but like that was the thing that I liked. And then I also really liked leg warmers. And so you had this incohesive mishmash of things, but that was who I was.
Mhm.
Versus just my brother who was just, I'm gonna be this. I'm
Yeah,
aiming for
watching
this
the show.
personality.
Yeah, like, thinking that you can, like, or that you can buy, or, like, be characters on TV, and also, like, completely forgetting the fact that, like, those characters on TV, like, I don't know really about the guys in Peaky Blinders. I'm guessing it's in, like, early 20th century England, is that correct?
Gangster
Like,
show in like, yeah, the 1900s.
yeah, like, we are not gangsters in the 1900s. You are a child, and you are going to school. What's going to be comfortable for you to wear during school? I also feel bad for people, because then like, they get into real life, and the reactions, or, like, the way that the world is playing off this very, um like, constructed or out of place persona, is not the reaction that these kids think that they're going to get. So they get a bunch of whiplash, and then suddenly think that they're outcasts because maybe nobody likes them or understands them, but really they've, like, through watching all of this content, they've taken themselves out of the context of the world.
I definitely think that we are going into into a world driven by consuming. And because we're focused so much on just consuming media, there's not a lot of room there for just being well grounded. I mean, you said you worked at a summer camp this summer, right?
Oh, yeah.
Did you notice how, I mean, did you notice how different the kids, I'm guessing they were in their tweens, were compared to like when we were growing up?
Um, like, to be honest, I think that kids were always kids, and because we gave those kids a lot of things to do, like, we were at a wilderness camp. So, we had them on schedule, like, like, to the half hour. We were, making them swing axes and tie knots and go swimming, and because they're kids, kids really want that kind of thing. Like, they really do want to run around, they just need to be given that opportunity. The one thing that I would say, or one of the things that I would say that I think was different about the kids was that they were all self-harming in different ways. Like, all of them. Like, especially the older kids were always, cutting themselves. There were the suicide pacts. There were, I mean, we had some kids, one thing was really weird. We had some kids like eating shit they weren't supposed to. Like, we had 3 kids that were like fully drinking bleach or about to, or like they definitely ate markers and crayons and glue. I think a lot of it was for attention. A lot of them, and I also I found that a lot of them were talking about the sexual assault that they had experienced by boys in their class or from teachers in school, which is probably, common no matter what. But I do want to keep in mind that 20% of like Pornhub's audience is under 10-year-olds. And so I noticed that these girls were exposed to sexual violence from a very, very young age, and were also afraid to tell their parents because of course they would. They also, of course, had gender identities, but I think that it was very light for them because they grew up when this like non-binary had never not been a thing from the time that they were conscious, like the poor things, I mean. But it sort of stopped becoming a fight for them. And it became more of like a self-expression thing. So we had kids in my class who were like gender fluid, not my class, my cabin, who identify as gender fluid or use different pronouns, but they were, I mean, we also had a kid who was 9 who used like duckling pronouns, which was ridiculous. Kid who's chocolate pronouns. But I really don't think that it came with the same trigger response that the teenagers in our generation had, because it's sort of blasé now. And that gives me a little bit of hope. Um, because I think that with them, it'll sort of all blow over because it won't be cool anymore.
It's kind of like that usual cringy thing you do when you're like a teenager, a young kid, and then you kind of grow out of it.
Yeah, exactly. Like they'll grow out of it. I think they'll be fine in terms of identity stuff. I mean, some of them I really worry about in terms of like the self-harming paths that they're going down. We had a little butch girl in my cabin who was constantly asked her pronouns, and she was so butch. Like, she was so butch that if it weren't an all girls camp, I would have mistaken her for a boy. But she used she her pronouns, and kids were constantly asking her about that. And I knew that she was anxious about her body changing because, like, you go from being indistinguishable from boys to realizing that you're not and you're going to get treated different. And she was also like definitely gay, and I felt like I was sort of the only thing standing between her not transitioning due to peer pressure. Um but um Yeah, so there's good news and there's bad news, I guess. Uh,
What were your
yeah.
coworkers like?
Like, superficially really nice. I like the truth is, like, people who are in this trans stuff, even people who are like, Christian or something, really super nice and reasonable and until it comes to the thing that triggers them. And when it came to the kids, many of them were really good at the kids and like putting aside their political stuff. Many of them were very young. Of course, it was mostly the they thems who were very self-centered. Many of them were 18, so which is like, I mean, when I was 18, I was on testosterone, so I know that a lot can change when is 18. But they were very cliquey. It seemed like they wanted to be at summer camp. And they didn't want to they weren't super interested in the kids. Um, and I was the only butch woman who wasn't non-binary. Actually, there were a few gender non-conforming women. I hope it's okay to say this. I mean, I think it's okay to say this. I noticed that all of the gender non-conforming women who weren't me were Black. Um, like they had come from different backgrounds, and it was just that like non-binary wasn't exactly a thing to do to them. I mean, some of them got it, but like their sort of frontier was coming out as gay, and yeah, non-binary didn't exactly have a factor in that.
Yeah, that's
Um,
something that I have noticed is like I said, I'm from Atlanta, so there
yeah.
is a pretty big stud community there. Like a lot, like there's the stud femme dichotomy for one, and then there's a lot of stud women in general, which I do think that there's slightly there's less of people, less studs identifying as non-binary, less black women in general doing that. But they're still, especially if they're going to college or they're in like the sphere where you hear of these things, they're aware of it, but it still feels kind of like a white people problem to
It
make
really is.
because in the
And there's
black
a reason.
communities, you're still having an issue with there's still homophobia. There's still that issue. That's
Yeah.
still very much a frontier. So we're not at a point where we can pretend that being gay is not at all an issue and that gender is the thing we need to focus on. It's just the does my mom, does my church, does my parents, does my family accept me as being a gay woman? And to an extent, if you are gay, they expect you to be masculine anyway. My parents certainly did. They were like, "Oh, you can't be gay. You're not a butch." And I was like, "You can
Yeah.
I could still be gay, mom."
Yeah. Well, my parents were like, "You can be gay, just not butch, really." Um, but, or at least that was the impression I got. But yeah, there was and I think that there's a reason why there's, like the Black Trans Lives Matter thing, which is the thing that they're trying to, I think, like, have you seen the sort of Trojan Horse thing where, like, the grand majority of trans people are white and upper middle class? But by getting more Black trans people in, by really grooming, or getting some Black gay people or Black trans people, they legitimize the trans movement as a human rights movement, which I think is really diabolical. Um,
I have
yeah,
noticed that they tend to use slogans from other movements. Black Lives Matter becomes Trans Lives Matter, or from feminism, it's, the future is feminist, now it's the future is trans. Like in general, I've noticed that they take slogans and they take goals from other communities. And because those slogans or those, goals have already been kind of legitimized through the other movement, it doesn't take as much work to get the slogans picked up. And, this we agree on this one too.
yeah, absolutely. And then the original movement is just disintegrated. It reminds me of, I mean, I like the Trojan horse analogy, but I like the analogy of the cuckoo or the cuckoo or brown. I like to say brown-headed cowbird because that's the bird from my area who does that. It's called a brood parasite. Do you know what a brood parasite is?
That's when they knock out the eggs in like the bird's nest and replace it with their own.
Yeah, exactly. And then that bird, that like parasitic bird, chokes out all of the other chicks and takes the attention of the mother away from its like rightful um children, and like flies away, never repays mom. That nest is empty. Like the parasitized birds don't prosper because they're killed or starved. And I mean, I love birds, but that's a bird that I struggle to like. And that's what I see the trans movement doing over and over again. It feels really, it's awful. I mean, it's awful, but in a way, it's also really, it's sort of beautiful and elegant. Like it's just incredibly, what is it like? Yeah, diabolical. Um, yeah, the my coworkers, um, and like this really was it was a place of enormous privilege there, like from the kids' side and um from the counselor side. I mean, they're always talking about the dogs they got from breeders, which is like a tip off, and the houses that they have. And um like I realized that even though we were literally at camp, they were like completely unwilling to talk about reality. And when Roe v. Wade was overturned, while I was at camp, they were completely unwilling to talk about Roe v. Wade because they were worried that it would offend, or like they were worried that it would offend, first of all, the one trans woman counselor at the camp. And they were also very adamant in saying that this was not a women's issue. It affects men and non-binary people as well. Um, and as a result of that, we actually never talked about Roe v. Wade with the kids, and I found it um, incredibly frustrating. I was so angry. Um, I was so angry at the counselors that I really genuinely liked, that I really like I worked hard at that camp, and I worked hard to work together with other counselors just to get through the, because it's a 24/6 job. Um, and that they weren't preparing these young girls for their reality as female people, the next generation, whose fight this is, just, yeah, like enraged me.
That's something that I was hoping that people would wake up with when Roe v. Wade was overturned, because inclusivity is all nice and dandy until it makes your direction useless. How can you focus on anything if your range is too broad? If if you're so busy trying not to offend certain people, you refuse to put name to the ills that other people have to face. Because, like, I don't know if you've seen a recent there's a woman on Instagram and TikTok, Letitia Kai. She's an African Radfem, and
Oh, yeah, she does the hair.
yes, and
Um,
I love her. She puts she just her hair is amazing. I love how graphic, just everything about it. It's amazing to me. It's so skilled. I'm so happy just to see a black woman be able to talk about topics like that. And then, of course, the minute, she says womanhood is based on my biology and that's it, because, of course, otherwise you're implying that womanhood is based on identifying with the stereotypes that are placed upon us. It implies that you
mhm.
could just opt out of the oppression that she faces. And she's from the Ivory Coast, so she still sees a lot of the hypotheticals we talk about in the West, breast ironing or FGM. Those are very real realities for the area that she comes from. And to just position it as, well, it's an everyone's issue. No, it's a woman's issue. And to say otherwise ignores that
Yeah.
there's a class of people, men, who is doing this to a class of people, women. That oppression is a directed force that's going from one class to another. It's not just some aimless thing just just happening to people.
Yeah, there's this, like, you're talking about this, this way of generalizing so much that it, like, disintegrates into nothing, and I think that's what they want. They don't, or, like, who's they? I don't know, the powers that be. Um, it's like this generalizing, this, this, um, anti-consciousness is, I guess it's like the new opium of the masses, right? It just, like, it stops people from thinking that there can be or should be a, like, a direct, a, like, movement, like, that there's a movement for certain classes, or and, Or they say like we need to uplift everyone, but the truth is we cannot lift everyone for specific reasons. But if that gets shot down all the time, we're constantly stuck in the same place, like over and over and over again, just like marching in place. With our fancy, jewelry and clothing bought from Forever 21, Amazon. And I'm really, what's her name again? That Instagrammer?
Tisha Kai.
Letitia Kai, is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I'm really happy that she's, like, I was just like, I basically screamed when I saw her, like, change her bio and saw that,
I think it's really great personally because I know that a lot of I've heard so many arguments that like, oh, radical feminism is white feminism. No, it's the feminism that most of the
yeah,
world practices because they have yet to get to a point where they can pretend their oppression doesn't exist. We are privileged in the West to be able to pretend to a pretty large degree that we've defeated it, that misogyny is gone, and that it's just the thing that occasional men do and not something that's perpetuated by a class.
yeah. Like, it's so powerful when Radfems of color actually speak out and also break into the Western world. Um, but I think that it also speaks sort of to like maybe the disenfranchisement of like black women in America or women of color in America, that maybe like we don't have so many prominent black red femmes in America. Um, does that make sense? Like,
I think that's
and
true.
so
I mean, personally, I think a lot of radical feminism has been censored online, partially because it's just so dangerous to put your face out there to say, hey, I'm a radical feminist, sex-based oppression is real, because the few women who did, who were white, cis, straight, had money, still face a lot of consequences for it. And
mhm.
to an extent, especially if you are just in the intellectual sphere, if you're in academia, there's this postmodernist take that there's no definitions, we include everyone. Even if you want to say that this is a thing that affects this group, you're not really allowed to say it without some immediate flashback. And I think to an extent during, especially after the riots, in 2020, I was kind of hoping that we would actually follow through on Black Lives Matter, listen to Black voices, but it's really just listen to Black voices that say what you want to hear.
Exactly. And it feels so, I don't know, it feels so cheap. Like I know that the voices that were lifted up at maybe my college, or like the um like who were of color were really only speaking the things that were objective, like colonialist takes that were really just like it felt like they were accessories to a movement that wasn't necessarily in their interests, and that alternating opinions, because everybody has different opinions and views, like were were suppressed, and that isn't true power, that isn't liberation. um, Although I heard, I didn't hear, like, wait, I saved this tab. I heard there's a website. I don't know. Um, oh yeah, there's a website called Free Black Thought. Do you know it?
No, haven't heard of it.
Okay, so wait, let me see if it's okay, about. We are a small group of scholars, technologists, parents, and above all, American citizens determined to amplify vital Black voices that are rarely heard on mainstream platforms. As citizens, we pursue no political agenda other than a commitment to free speech, civil rights, and a conviction that a pluralistic society committed to liberal democracy is nourished by the entire spectrum of Black thinking on matters of politics, society, and culture. So that's freeblackthought.com. Check it out.
Yeah, definitely. To be honest, um, a couple weeks ago, I had someone commenting on like a couple of my videos on the Roe v. Wade passing about how I wasn't centering Black women's struggles as much. And to be honest, I'm biracial. I do identify, like, I hate saying it like that. I'm Black. I'm dark enough to where no one's gonna look at me and think, oh, a white girl. So
Yeah.
I'm Black. But to an extent, I feel like there's always been certain issues in the community that are kind of difficult to broach. Like
Mhm.
there, for example, marriage. In typical radical feminist thought, marriage is a something that's generally not a great thing. There's a lot of chances for a man to take advantage of your dependence on him. There's been so many examples of men changing after marriage, that kind of thing. But in the black community, there's been such a broad number of single black mothers, a lot of broken families that if you're coming from a black feminist lens, then a marriage or like just a household with two parents is more radical than separatism may seem. And there is a slight division there. There's a certain intersectionality that I do think this is what intersectionality was originally meant to, talk about. The differences that disabled women, black women, gay women face as a result of being a woman and having something else. Um, but quite honestly, I think that we don't. I haven't heard too many radical feminists who are black and outspoken. There's some. There's definitely some. But I feel like we don't hear nearly as much, and they're certainly not as high up out there as publicized as some of the white mega turfs or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I think that they might like they they might face like flack from more powerful people for saying that they're traitors in some sense, or like they might lose their jobs more easily, white rad femmes. But um to what you were wait, I'm trying to gather my thoughts.
It's
Um
okay.
say more.
Well, for one thing, we lost bell hooks. I think it was earlier this year. We do have. I do think there's a large diversity of voices out there. I just think that with how marginalized radical feminism has become on the internet, it's become a lot harder to find those voices to uplift, and especially to find people to volunteer to even speak out. I mean, hell, my YouTube channel has like 1,000 subscribers. It's mostly positive attention. No one's gonna like dox you from my sad channel. But I still have a
Yeah.
hard time finding people to talk to at times because there's a certain risk that's kind of hard to downplay, and especially so if you are like I feel like to a certain extent we have positioned being a minority as a defensive measure. Like if you look at people, for example, especially with men, Ezra Miller, he abuses women, kidnaps someone,
Mhm.
comes out as non-binary to deflect. Like it's a certain
Yeah.
kind of if you are some form of minority, then you can get out of jail free card, but it doesn't really work as well when you're actually a minority. It's only when you're one of the few, usually when it's a gender minority at this point.
Mhm. And like the minority you're talking about is only like the black community is only listened to primarily when they're catering to the interests of white liberals. And so like I think that yeah, as I was saying, never mind. It's yeah, there is like an amount of vulnerability from both sides. I also wonder if is feminism like something that's even talked about among black women? I get this feeling that it's like less common, that it's like feminism is not something that is discussed.
Well, so
Um,
I have a roommate. I've lived with her for about a year now. I love her. She is awesome. She's like an older sister to me. She's about 30.
Mhm.
And we talk about feminism all the time. And the thing is, it's just partially how you approach the subject of people. Few people are going
Mhm.
to automatically think, oh, I'm making feminist talking points. Most people don't really know what feminism is because of how the definition has been broadened to just mean being nice to everyone. So I
Oh,
feel like
yeah.
a lot of women, a lot of black women might not necessarily say this is feminism, but I went to downtown before I left for my trip earlier this summer, and there was a woman there looking to get hotel rooms for some of the homeless women in the city center during the heat wave. That's a form of feminism.
Mhm.
It's just we didn't put a name to
Yeah.
it. She didn't advertise this as a feminist action. It was just the thing she did, just the thing you do because you're being nice. There's
Yeah,
the
the right thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, and then of course there's smaller things like make sure you like my mom even giving advice, like just the advice you get given through a community. Like all of my family always being like, be careful about the men you spend time around. It's always a small kind of thing that people aren't really going to put a name to and say this is feminism, but there's definitely feminist thought everywhere. I think anywhere women are oppressed, there is feminist thought. Just that not everyone's going to automatically know that's what they're thinking. They just think of it as an automatic reaction to the reality that they're in.
Mm. Do you think that, like, if feminism is sort of like a hot button topic, or like also like associated with white people, like would it be beneficial to like rebrand feminism as something else, as like common sense, or do you think that it's would be better to like or like the uphill battle of like really educating people on what feminism really is would be worth it?
I think it's more important to have a class consciousness, not just with women in your community, not just with other black women, but with women across the globe. Because to be honest, I'd trust any woman over any man. I automatically have more in common with any woman of any creed, any race, any class than with any man. And to be honest, I think that personally I've noticed that there is a big education gap. There is a big wealth gap. But I think giving name to the struggles that we face and a name that is clearly recognized is more beneficial than trying to rebrand it as something else for the sake of getting past the way the internet has portrayed it recently. Because I wouldn't like if I feel like if you go back 20 years, no one would be confused over what feminism meant, no matter what community you were in. They might not agree with it,
Yeah.
they might not necessarily think they needed it, but they knew what it meant. And nowadays it's been so watered down to where, let's say you disagree with wearing skimpy bikinis. You don't want to wear revealing clothing. Oh, well, that's shown as feminist. I'm not feminist because I don't agree with that thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So like, and I think that maybe one of the I really want to begin like a concerted effort in preserving or like projecting women's history, like that people maybe 20 years ago had more. Yeah, and I'm seeing that, okay, I was never taught in school about the entire women's rights movement. Like, I only had this one class when I could have had, a whole semester dedicated to women's rights and women's rebellions and free thought and philosophy. I could have had an entire school experience thinking of that, and yet I haven't. And this has completely prevented class consciousness, which is also something I think Mary Daly goes goes into in her book. It's about like totally cutting off class consciousness by erasing our shared history. And I wonder in what way can we like what way can we uplift those voices and those stories so that more women are moved in the way that I was moved and that maybe you were moved.
Honestly, I think it's a difficult question of how to get the knowledge of just women's history, of women's oppression in general, out to a general populace because you're not just going against ignorance. You're not just going against, just not knowing about the topic. You're going against literally a miseducation on what being a woman has been like for centuries. Like if you go back
Yeah.
and see how people portray, for example, the suffragette movement as being some peaceful, like we held signs and then one day the men gave us rights. That's not what happened.
They
Or
were force fed, like
I sincerely hate that concept of like, or even like with I feel like especially with the gender ideology going around.
mhm.
Even in like to be honest, the last woman I went out with was a stud, and being from Atlanta, I really didn't think she would know about the gender stuff just because it typically isn't that big of a thing in the black community. But she did, and she was like, "Oh, what are your pronouns?" And I was like, "Oh no, you got
No!
so far. I thought you weren't gonna
Oh, I
ask."
was so turned on until you said that.
And I mean, my
Oh,
Instagram profile has radical feminist stuff all over it. Literally, you
yeah,
can't not know that I'm radical feminist. And she was still willing. She didn't really care. She still was willing to hear me out. She thought it
yeah,
was brave that I spoke up about these things. Any discussion we had about politics would have to come from avoiding certain keywords. And you have to
yeah,
really limit yourself and what you can express when you have to take out, oh, am I using the word woman too much? Am I using the word oppression too much? Am I using misogyny too much? Am I using these very real words with real definitions too much? Am I potentially setting off these red flags that say that anything that's not approved thought is bad, and therefore you shouldn't even listen to it. You shouldn't even entertain it.
Exactly. And like I'm like really stuck between like running through the minefield with like just like complete abandon, like just like cuz I'm sick of doing this little dance, like this little dance with my words. AFAB non-binary, what are they called? The TMEs and the TMAs and like I'm not a monkey. Like I don't want to dance for you. And I also don't want to lose my job again. um, which is what happened at camp for those of you listening. Uh it's just so undignified, which I think is like the point of doing this whole pronouns thing. I saw another like maybe a Twitter post saying that like the pronouns thing is a sign of submission, that you submitted to this ideology, and that you're willing to call other people what they want to be called instead of like trusting your own instinct or trusting your own and your your own integrity, interacting with people with integrity. It it basically says you won't do that, and I do not want to grovel anymore. I'm sick of it. And in that sort of pursuit, I know that I've gotten very reckless. Um, and I don't yet care.
See, I feel that because on one hand, I don't like to lie to people. I don't like to present myself as something that I'm not. I have plenty of videos and images of myself, even linked to my Instagram, of myself on my channel. I'm not hiding my identity here. And the thing is, I just feel like in general, people will agree with the tenets of radical feminism. They just don't want to agree with the name radical feminism.
Mhm.
And I don't like having to dumb down messages or have to. For example, last year I went out with I didn't know this till after I went on a date with her, but she was the president of the GSA at my college.
Mm.
But her profile was like butch lesbian from I'll just say Eastern Europe, and didn't say anything about pronouns. And I was like, oh, awesome, Eastern Europe, that's cool.
Mhm.
She's a study abroad student, and she's butch, which I love. Butch women are like going
Yeah.
endangered. It's so sad.
Where?
And we got to like the third date, and we went to like a mountain to go hiking. So mind
Yeah.
you, we're in the middle of nowhere, stuck together on a mountain.
Mhm.
And she goes, I think feminism is transphobic.
No, and you had nowhere to run.
And I was just sitting there like I didn't know how to respond to that because it's like this is gonna be an awkward ass time. I really liked her too, and I was like, I have a choice,
Yeah.
right? I can either spend weeks or months trying to get my point across using perfectly crafted arguments and avoiding all talk of trans people and making sure I avoid all those little minefields, or I can just get through this one date and then just call it quits. And I considered it because she was really nice. I enjoyed her company a lot, but it's so fake to have to work through all that just to get across points that we all agree on. She came from a country that was very homophobic, had never held hands or kissed a woman because it was so homophobic. Comes to the US, identifies as a he, they, non binary, and doesn't want to admit that the reason why she was facing homophobia was because she was a female homosexual, because she was a gender non-conforming female. If you don't want to confront
Yeah,
those
that
truths, how do you move forward from there? How do you change the forces that make that a negative experience if you won't just admit that those forces exist?
I think that it like I've had experiences just like that where I've known, especially like I had a professor who was from Eastern Europe and a lesbian, but didn't identify that way. Um, I literally fought for gay rights there, and had to leave because of being a lesbian, and still was one of the most, adamantly, like ferociously, trans, anti-woman people that I know. Um, and then there was also a girl who I knew who was, or a woman I knew who, um, was from a cult, basically. She was from, a Hasidic community, and then went the whole other way, used she, he, they pronouns, was very involved with the trans community there and wanted nothing to do with women. And I think that, like, if you live in a really woman-hating culture, like, you escape that, and the next woman-hating culture is going to be a lot more comfortable than and, like and familiar to you than women's liberation, which is completely unrecognizable or, like, even unattainable, because how many places are you able um, to really appreciate yourself and love yourself and accept yourself as a woman in this world?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a lonely road to walk to admit to the oppression that we see. There's that quote by Dworkin about how it's just so hard for women to actually confront their oppression.
What was the
I'm gonna
quote?
Google it.
It's something about, it, like please do, as you doing this, I'll talk. Like, something about, like, the extent of the anger and the violence that you recognize that has been committed against you, your sisters, your mother, like, the amount of women who you know are sort of beyond, I'm not gonna say saving, I don't wanna sound like I have, like, a savior complex, but, that are so deep in the patriarchy that there is no getting them out of it, and the amount of loneliness you feel and the amount of rage that you feel you've never been able to feel is, um, so overwhelming that many women who recognize it might even turn their backs from it because it's just so awful.
Google's not helping me,
Uh,
but you basically summed it up.
yeah.
I feel like whenever I try to search up
Um,
a feminist quote, Google gives me nothing. It
nothing, no. Google is, misogynist. Google is, I don't know, Google's Google. I've been thinking a lot about, this is a tangent. I was thinking a lot about, how code is a completely male-dominated field, for however many reasons, but how code was also, um like, code was invented by a woman. It was invented a weaving machine in France, I think, um, and I'm also thinking about, Arachne as the spider goddess and the, and not she wasn't a goddess, but, Athena as the goddess of weaving in Greek mythology, and, um, how I wish that we could get more, I guess, female coders. Like, I wonder if there was a female-dominated, like, created sort of internet, what would the internet look like now? How would our communication, like, change? That would be a huge project, but I think it would be really a game changer, really incredible.
Yeah, like I do remember reading about how coding in general has biases because the coders have biases. For example, with facial recognition, or hell, even sometimes like soap dispensers won't register darker skin. And I think that definitely goes for misogyny in coding as well. And then because so many male-dominated fields are actively hostile to women, it's so hard for them to get a foothold in there. Even if you love the work, even if you're good at it, you have to be able to handle the fact that you're going to be sexually harassed, or you're going to be in an environment that's going to treat you like shit, and you have to just deal with it. Like, there is no real safe haven in coding or in computer science in general for women. It's very male dominated, and of course, nowadays, they can fill their quotas for diversity by adding in trans women, which doesn't help at all at actually diversifying the code they produce.
No, now there's so many women, trans women, and, like, everybody knows that if there's a woman I mean, it's like some 35-year-old man, um, in a wig. Um, no, and because you mentioned this, like, very hostile environment towards women even if they get, like, in a position of power, well, like, they're talked down to, like, they're not in position of power, and they're also And I'm wondering, like, are there apprenticeships for female possible? Is that I'll look into that. Even though like the idea of sitting in a dark room like tapping on a computer is like worse than hell for me. Uh like we need a place for that.
That's something that like personally I've heard a couple places where they're doing like more all-female trade classes like for fixing cars or just like welding, and those tend to fill up really quick because like honestly I wanted to be a psychologist forever, like since like freshman year. But if I hadn't have done that, I would have gone into welding or something 'cause I love working with my hands. But I know that like in high school a lot of those classes were co-ed, and the minute you make a mistake in a co-ed class, the boys are going on about how it's because you're a woman, it's because you're female. And the classes that are all female tend to be a lot more just a nicer environment. And so,
Yeah.
something that I know it's actually a pretty common desire. I've been in more than I think 3 or 4 Radfem servers where women have brought up the idea of I want to run a camp to teach women skills, or I want to, have workshops for women to do, hands-on work. And that's something that I really wish that we could have more widespread. Like hell, at YMCA or Boy Club or something, at the Boys Club, or I think that's what it's called. Just
Yeah.
have classes where here's how you change a tire, here's how you change oil, you take care of your own car. Skills that you could need to be independent, so you don't have to rely on men to do everything for you.
Yes. Like the older that I get, like I was like I was born into a family of domesticated women, if that makes sense. I love my mom and my grandmothers, but um like it's almost like we're castrated in terms of ability, and we're not told even how to mow a lawn or change a light bulb. Um, and the since I got into college, I actually met a butch woman who lives down my street, and she's sort of like she knows everything. She's not a rad femme just because she couldn't really be bothered, but she's like she works with her hands, like, a lot. She, like, built her own deck, and, she built a shed in the backyard for her wife to write a book in, and I started, like, getting into, like, handy stuff or, like, deciding to do things because I can and because I'm capable, and it made me feel like so much stronger, so much more of a person just because I could interact with my world and make things better without having some guy do it. Um, and I do wish that there was a place for that. And originally, the summer camp that I was at was that place because we were teaching girls to swing axes and, um, like, build fires, go camp in the woods by themselves. Um, but now it's that message is completely different or like completely negated by the fact that like the kids or the counselors that are too butch, that are too capable, are no longer women. Um, and of course, you can't go to a camp on the other side of that spectrum, um, because I mean, those are very Christian camps, possibly homophobic camps. So where is the place to go? That isn't, like Michigan family reunion. Um,
Yeah, I definitely think, well, for one, just having female separatist spaces where we can operate outside of the realm of the male gaze, which it's more
Mhm.
than just, wanting to perform femininity or beauty. It's also just when you feel like you're being watched, you perform less well. They remember there was quite a few studies on this where like women they were told to imagine themselves in a bikini while taking a math test, or they wore a bikini or something, and did much worse than the men who did the same thing basically. It's just like we need to have spaces for women where we are able to excel without having the undue pressure of remembering that we're women every 2 seconds.
Yeah. And I think that even comes down to the smallest things is like what you were saying, like wearing clothes. Like the clothes that kids are wearing these days are criminal. Or like even that just women these days, and I'm not saying that to shame anyone, it's that I know that they're thinking about their bra strap showing every 2 seconds, or they're thinking about people looking at them every 2 seconds, and that they're cold in buildings that are heated at the temperature that is right for male bodies and 2 or 3 too cold for female bodies. Um, like they're just completely incapacitated, or not completely, but enough incapacitated as sexual objects in the places that they are supposed to be learning, um, and intimidated by boys who are also supposed to be learning. It's really shameful, and that's sort of why I'm sort of for school uniforms. I mean, I think that school uniforms are always sexualized, but why do girls have to wear skirts? Like, why can't everybody wear school uniforms that are like, covered and functional? Um, so that like kids can truly concentrate on their studies. Is that too much to ask?
I guess
Um,
so, honestly.
I guess so. Um, and it's not that I want to stifle anybody's individuality, but I also don't believe that individuality is about clothes at all. Like it is about character and about the choices that you make. Um, and I'm really not worried about kids. I think especially like Disney Channel original, the stuff we grew up with, uh, held individuality or like personal, stylistic expression to be the thing that kids needed to fight for above all else. But we prioritize much less, uh, real autonomy, real free thinking, in pursuit of that goal of, you know, aesthetic, which ends up being, like distracting for everybody.
I do think that just in general, I know that I hated having uniforms when I was a kid, but I do think to an extent it does help when you're not thinking about how you can stand out, how you look when you just have to look a certain way. Maybe you'll focus more on your schoolwork, but
Yeah. I mean, the truth is I never wore a uniform. So you're talking from experience. And I don't know how I really wouldn't have felt good in school and I had to wear a skirt, or I was the only girl not wearing a skirt and I was wearing pants because then everybody would know I was gay. Um, but I know that dressing in different clothes, it always comes with like people can tell what kind of money you come from. You wear, certain outfits or have a certain thing. And I think that uniforms really do to um like maybe bring people together across those um like class barriers maybe. Um yeah.
one thing I did want to ask you about is, like I said, I have used your blog extensively for research for a lot of my videos, particularly with the effects of testosterone. And I know that you're very vocal
Yeah.
about that. So, what have you learned from your research?
Oh man. I mean, like so much more about the human vagina than I ever thought I would. So much. And like I'm screaming it from the rafters every single fucking chance I get because nobody else is doing it. Um but basically most of what I learned was chemical and was very concerning to me. Like is there anything specifically that you were thinking about in terms of that research?
Well, I know that you've made like an archive and that you've gotten like I've seen you respond to people who have questions that are usually directed at, trans blogs asking about, side effects, and people tend to push back a lot. Like you're never rude to anyone. You're just pointing out here are side effects that you might face that they don't tell you about, and yet people are just revolting against you like you're saying something blasphemous.
Yeah. Like I can start by talking about the actual like side effects that I'm talking about and some of the like some of the responses I've gotten for that afterward. So basically what I discovered was that like testosterone, well, first of all, it sort of counteracts any estrogen that you have in your body. And that estrogen is keeping the pH of your vagina, first of all, at like a 4, which is very, very acidic, because the pH scale is like 7 is in the middle. The lower you go, the more acidic. The higher you go, the more basic. And the reason that our vaginas are so acidic is to kill bacteria that could enter through this quite large opening into our vital organs. And testosterone in the mix, or less estrogen in the mix, makes that pH go way up, because the healthy bacteria that are creating the acidity no longer have glycogen. Glycogen is a store of carbohydrates that estrogen basically stimulates the production of. The bacteria eat the glycogen, and the bacteria keep the vagina acidic. They can't do that when there's no estrogen. And so as a result, many infections just, like you see a lot of trans men getting recurrent chronic UTIs, and these UTIs can extend into the bladder and eventually into the kidneys. Sepsis. That's quite common. There's also yeast infections are a big thing. The other thing that is also somewhat commonly mentioned is vaginal atrophy. And that extends to uterine atrophy, and even urethral atrophy, which the lack of estrogen in the vagina and the uterus, everything to get very thin, and eventually it makes it very easy to tear and to break. And so this means that any type of penetration is painful. It can cause bleeding. And because the uterus is eventually atrophied, the uterus holds up major pelvic organs. Like all of the organs in your pelvis and the muscles in your pelvis and abdomen are supported by the uterus. And when that uterus is collapsed, you could get a pelvic organ prolapse. You could have like really, really horrible pain. People liken it to period pain, but worse. It's really just awful. And then as a result of this atrophy, people experience the combination of atrophy and infection can cause incontinence, and it can, like, the nerves of one's bladder can burn off from repeated infections, which makes it like people just don't know, or women don't know when they have to pee. And so, incontinence, it's really, really awful. And it's not something that can be completely reversed without going off of testosterone. So what I hear people say is that like there are local atrophy creams and suppositories that you can take that will counteract the effects of testosterone locally in that area. But first of all, you can't squirt estrogen all the way into your uterus. So that uterine atrophy is going to happen until you get a hysterectomy. And the estrogen that's counteracting the vaginal atrophy, or the like the like maybe urethral atrophy, it might work to a certain extent, but not nearly enough. This cream was used primarily it's used for postmenopausal women, because postmenopausal women also have they have less estrogen. That's what menopause is. But what trans people who are using this excuse postmenopausal women too also, get vaginal atrophy. This is true, but they aren't doping with testosterone. They don't have steroids coursing through their veins for, like that atrophy can happen within a couple months and it can happen in a couple years. But this is supposed to happen in menopausal women. It's not supposed to happen in 20-year-old women. And the amount of atrophy that happens at the rate that it happens is not going to be stopped and completely mitigated by a cream. It just won't. The only way to stop this from happening is to go off of testosterone. That's the only like quick fix. And it is a quick fix. Not that everything, like if your nerves have been, you are not going to be able to like control when you pee for the rest of your life. But a lot of the effects can be reversed. The only problem is that you have to stop taking the thing that is killing you, and that is making up your identity, which I find to be that was kind of a rant. It's quite tragic.
No, I definitely agree. Well, I don't know when this will come out, but like last week I did a video on how the medical community is using trans people like an experiment, and how the community, like, transsexualism has always been treated as an experiment. From the original patient, Lily, who they just plopped the uterus in her without, and they knew that it wouldn't work.
Oh.
And
Oh, this was the painter, you mean?
yes. And,
Yeah.
going on, of course, until today, where they're still basically playing experiments. That's why we have that clinic, the Tavistock clinic in the UK. Finally, they're getting sued by like 1,000 people because they played
Yeah.
experimentally with their bodies, and now they're seeing they fucked around. Now they're finding out.
Fucked around with thousands of children. And puberty blockers are, I would say, even worse, like way worse than, I mean, I don't know if it's a contest, but those puberty blockers literally are castrating children and are giving them brittle bones by the time that they're in their 20s, and are giving like horrible systemic joint pain, muscle pain, fatigue that might set in after a single shot of that drug. But I would like to see that same level of skepticism and of justice given to the adults and the teenagers taking testosterone and estrogen, especially because we should actually, isn't necessarily an experiment. Well, I mean, it is an experiment in that it's irresponsible and there's no evidence for the benefit of it, but we know women who take too much testosterone because we know women who have polycystic ovarian syndrome, ovary syndrome, sorry. We know women who have PCOS. The one thing that these women have in common, some of them are, like many of them have a problem with insulin. Many of them are diabetic, but about 20% of them or something like that don't have that. The thing that both of these groups of women with polycystic ovary syndrome have in common is high testosterone. And these women have maybe like, let's say like 10 times more testosterone, 5 times more testosterone than your healthy woman. And they have horrible pain, like horrible pain all the time. They have hardened cystic ovary. And of course, they have many of the other so-called, trans affirming effects of testosterone, such as like male pattern baldness and hairiness and all that. But the amount of testosterone that women on testosterone, women taking testosterone for the purposes of transitioning are taking is hundreds of times more than women should be taking, and maybe like dozens of times more than a woman with PCOS is taking. So I think like the average amount of testosterone that a woman in the normal range has is something like 7 nanomoles per deciliter, something like that. Let me see. Wait, I always forget the unit meaning. I'm really not a scientist. I just started to read. Okay, so it's yeah, nanomoles, 10. Okay, nanograms per deciliter. Okay, 10 to 30 nanograms per deciliter, and a woman with PCOS has about 150, maybe. And the average man has 700, 1,250, something like that. And the women that are taking testosterone for transitioning are taking, they have been recorded to have levels at around like 2,000. And so the amount of pain is proportional, in some sense, to the amount of testosterone that they're taking. The pain that they are going to be in compared to women PCOS of no will of their own, like is astronomically worse and astronomically faster. And it really bothers me that endocrinologists who have known this for decades are the ones prescribing this drug to healthy women. You know, like, and not telling them about the consequences that will inevitably.
And definitely think that there's like a lie of informed consent. That's something that you were a really great resource on, because I know a couple people who went on testosterone in college. Freshman year, two or three of the girls I knew went on testosterone, and they were opposite sex attracted even. And
Mm-hmm.
I just remember I mean, I'm diabetic, I'm used to needles, they don't scare me or anything, but it's like
Yeah.
within a couple weeks they acted different. They seemed to be feeling, first they felt, better, I suppose, but they didn't feel like the same person I'd met before. They really felt like they were
Yeah.
dealing with more, I guess. It didn't seem like it was a solution they thought it would be to whatever problems they had.
No, I mean, it's like hormones change your feelings. I mean, it changes the way that you interact, the way like when the temperature of the world is different than it's ever been to you. Like when people talking to you has a different emotional effect on you, which is really what testosterone is to me. And when it's giving you health problems that you're not acknowledging as health problems, like the hot flashes that I had even a few months in, um, like the people that you're talking to are not the people that might have been, you know, in some senses reasonable in some way before. They're it it's impossible to say how they would have reacted before taking testosterone. Um, and I found that too. Like a lot of I know that a lot of girls, women who took um testosterone during my freshman year, who I found I mean, I thought that the many of them were very, I mean, I'm gay, they were arresting, okay? Like, um, all the gay women, in my year, um, and I went back to that town. Right now, I'm out of my college town, but, I visited for about a week, and I met one of the trans men, who, you know, had taken testosterone second semester, freshman year, and had gotten top surgery and all that. And I'm gonna use he pronouns just because I don't know, like I have affection for some people. Like I also never know who's listening. And I want everyone to know that no, I mean like this guy is a woman, but um I I don't know. He um you know, he was talking really about how he felt so unattractive and about how he was drinking at work all the time and um was so high senior year that he doesn't even remember and I remember my freshman year being attracted to her and thinking that everyone thought that she was attractive and really confident and knew who she was and dressed really well. Not that dressing well matters, especially not to me. I dress like a slob, but um I yeah, I guess I don't think that had he known what he would look like or feel like, senior year, especially in the eyes of others, like would he transition? And does he feel that he's just in too deep to get out of it now? And I also wonder just how many of those women that came in with me freshman year regret their transitions and feel like they're in too deep now because it has been a few years.
Do you think that people are facing a sort of pressure from the community to continue going through with transition, even if they personally don't really want to continue?
Yeah, because the trans community, it really does operate. If your family doesn't accept you, which they may not, which is very reasonable to be like, no, you're not a boy. Um, like it, you're really told to cut off your family. I was told to cut off my family. I barely talked to my mom freshman year, because I thought she was transphobic. And when you start to get out of it, you have no one except for the trans community because that's your family and you haven't talked to your family in a while and you don't know how to talk about anything other than this. Um, like it, it feels like, and you've spent all this money too, right? Like you spent all this money on surgeries and hormones and enamel pins and shit, and um, you feel like you have nothing, and like you're so ashamed. Um, you did all this for nothing. I mean, I found it to be the most rewarding thing I ever did, but especially when you have that much sunken cost, um, and when you've hurt your family so much, you've hurt your family so much that you've disappointed them, it can feel really impossible. It can feel like it definitely felt for me that impossible to be a girl. Like it felt harder for me to be non-binary because I hadn't been one for so long. Um, and I never thought that I could be a girl because I was so gender nonconforming. I always felt like I was failing at it. That by the time I came back to it, it it felt almost impossible. And also at my college, there was a trans life collective at the college. There was basically it was sort of like a mini cult. I'm pretty sure they had orgies and documented.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
it was really crazy, very poly, very it was really, oh my god, it was crazy. There was no gay club. There was no club for lesbians, there was no club for gay men. There were barely any gay on campus. The people in the trans life collective who were men were straight men who wore earrings and called themselves they. Um and took advantage of all of these gender nonconforming women. Um you could say that they were chasers, but I guess they were just men who found a demographic. Um, so there was a trans group. There was no gay group. There was no place to discuss being homosexual. And even now, like there also wasn't like LGB Alliance. Even not that I would have checked them out because liberals are calling them Nazis. But um, in our world, there's just no possibility of forming, and you're gay, other than being trans, and it can really feel like you're walking from a ostensibly, a loving community, albeit one that, groomed you into, or convinced you to cut off your breasts and, change your body forever. You're walking into this loving community who is your family, telling you that they're your family, into nothing, into literally no support, possibly not even your family. Um, it's it's incredibly scary. Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely heard many stories of just how the trans community kind of isolates you. And I do remember reading this one article on Substack where this, I think it was a lesbian, wrote about how she didn't realize how alone she was on her college campus until she paused and looked back and saw that supposed gay straight alliance, or I know it's called something different nowadays, but the gay straight alliance was full of a lot of, queer people, people who weren't actually same sex attracted, and that the minute she declined to date like a trans woman, they all turned on her. And that every single piece of activism, every single piece of discussion they had to be inclusive of everyone to the extent that you couldn't actually discuss, the personal experiences you have as a person, as a part of being a demographic. Like, you're not allowed to put, especially on academic places. Like, in general, I feel like colleges are breeding grounds for postmodernist thought where you're not allowed to have boundaries. You're not allowed to say that I am different from this person and that's okay. You're not allowed to really put a name to your own experiences in any meaningful way.
No, not in any meaningful way, which is really frustrating. I don't know if this is a tangent, but, like, I had this, um and we were reading a book about, incredible book. I love this book. It's by, um, Caroline Walker Bynum. It's about women's food practices in medieval Europe, and, I mean, the thing that these women had in common, of course, was religion. Many of them were, like, starving themselves because they were unifying with Christ and all that. Using their bodies as, like, their bodies are symbols of food. Food is a s like, food in the body is also Christ, and so they were united with Christ and found empowerment in their own way. That was awesome. But I was talking about how this is I was presenting this book to the class. We all had to present a book, and I was like, this is very clearly a sexed experience. These women were doing that because they had their bodies. I never said that there were no trans women who were talking about food and God and Jesus in this way. And there were examples in the book where men had related their you know their own spirituality in almost a similar way as women who did, but upon further definition, it was completely different. They just related differently because they had different bodies, they had different experiences. Um, and this girl, who I don't know how I wouldn't have graduated her. I don't know. Like she was a gender and sexuality studies major. She was doing her senior project on Judith Butler,
Oh
and
God.
she told me yeah, great start. She said, "Well, actually, there are 78 different, like, endocrine profiles, different sexes," and I was like, "Do you think that that's what these women in the 13th century were saying? Is that, like, literally, you know, we had to make space for this girl to, I mean, call into question the historical perspective of these women." And that's one thing that I really the finding it's very much like flat earth or like young earth creationists saying, well, we believe this, and now let's go through history and rewrite it to fit that now. The fact that we were rewriting history in class in a space that was supposed to like like enlighten us to the perspectives of these women, not enlighten these dead women to our perspectives. Really frustrating.
Yeah, I'm really tired of people fitting historical figures into a modern viewpoint. Like, I saw someone, they were doing a production of like Joan of Arc and making her
Joan of Arc,
non-binary.
I don't. Oh, that's oh. I'm gonna like projectile vomit everywhere. Yeah. It's also annoying because it's like it comes from somebody who would, otherwise be called a butch, and what something that really breaks my heart. I Trans people would like totally, flip their shit over me saying this, but like, um, it sucks that, like, women who would have been my sisters, like, the people that I would have confided in and who I would have had community with are the people that sort of, like, are conducting the extinction, the demolition of class consciousness of women the most. I hate that I'm, like, really, yeah, against people who I would otherwise, like, 30, 40 years ago would have called sisters. Um, but
Yeah,
yeah,
and that's just something that's very frustrating to me is you have to rewrite history in order to put trans people into history, whereas there have always been gay people. It's a modern
yeah,
invention to have this discomfort with your sex, and I think that partially comes from hypersexuality with which that society is inundated with. But I also think that increased interconnectivity in internet use and just general escapism has played into the rise of alternate gender identities.
yeah, because you don't well, you think that it's something you can put on or, like, in the way that you can put on a username, and you don't realize that, like, it's built or, um, built in a lifetime, and that political um, like, statuses are not bought, they're put upon you, um, because of how you're born and where you're born and when you're born. Uh, Awful. Um, yeah.
Well, let me just say that I have had an awesome time talking to you. Every time I do one of these things, I'm like, yeah, we'll cut it off, after we get through the main points. We'll say some, interesting things, and we'll stop around 30 minutes or an hour, and then inevitably it ends up being a 2-hour recording.
Oh, awesome. I love when that happens. Like, I love talking. Let's talk anytime.
I just think it's really awesome to actually have conversations with other people who can see the world as it is, put it like that. It's very frustrating at times
Ugh,
having the self-censor and having to, quiet yourself down in discussions. And it's just very nice to be able to say, "Hey, this is a real thing," and to have someone else say, "Yes, I know."
I know. Just like it feels like I'm in the desert sometimes. Like I'm a camel and my hump falling over, but now I've drunken. I've drunken from the oasis. So thank you. um yeah. Yeah, thanks for putting this together, and I look forward to hearing it.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording.